Yeah. Just one of you. Lisa? Five, yeah. Peter Cameron? No relation? David Cameron? Ex-Prime Minister? No. Bruce, now I think... Ah, you're here? And there's two of you. Yeah. Did you ring to say you might be late? No? Somebody else then. Hello? Peter Sutcliffe? Ah, he might be the person that's going to be late. Three people, yeah. Oh, yeah. Graham Deverell?
Right here.
They're right here.
That's what my mom said.
You're on the tour now, your name's here.
Okay, that's what my mom said.
The Jow Woods?
Yeah, that's me.
Oh.
Us too. Yeah.
Sorry, terrible pronunciation.
That's pretty good actually.
That was it?
Yeah.
Sheer fluke. Michael Harvey. Yes. Okay, so it's just Peter Sutcliffe missing. Now somebody rang to say they're running 10 minutes late. So what we're going to do is we're going to move slightly further away from the office here, and we're going to start the introduction, and then hopefully they'll be here by the time I've finished it. Okay? If not, we're going to press on anyway, and they might catch up with us later on. So if you'd just like to follow me. Before we go, I just need to do a health and safety thing, because this is Britain. Oxford's a very safe place generally. We just need to be aware of, obviously, traffic. And the sneaky thing in Oxford are bikes. They come round the corner really fast, and they're silent, so you don't see them coming, so do watch out. And obviously it's quite an old city, so the pavement slabs are not very even. So sometimes if you're walking around like this, and I do it all the time, you go, wait! So just be mindful of that as well. Okay? And when we're out walking and in groups, I'll try and get you as close together as I can, just so I don't deafen everybody else in the area. Okay, let's have a walk on then. So that's taken from Oxon Ford. Lots of people know that. It's a ford in the river. No one's actually sure where the ford was, by the way. Some people think it's on the south, some people think it's on the west. But no one knows for certain, and archaeologists argue about it all the time. Now Oxford starts in earnest as a fortified town under Alfred the Great. It's actually older than England, Oxford. It was in the Mercian kingdom. This is on the Mercia-Wessex border, two ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. And this was a border town, basically, and it gets fortified. Why is it fortified? Because of the Viking raids. This is to protect the Saxons from the Vikings. They're very bloodthirsty. Are you paying attention? Anyway, so it starts off as a town. No university. The university doesn't come along until the 12th century. That's the 1100s. Now, Oxford is the third oldest university in the world. The oldest is Bologna in Italy, second oldest is Paris, and then comes Oxford. Now, there is no date for the starting of Oxford. Some guides will tell you there is, but there isn't. Basically, what happens is a group of academics gather for no apparent reason in Oxford, and they attract more and more academics. Then what happens is a royal palace is built in Beaumont Street, just up the road. Now, wherever you get a royal palace, you need civil servants, you need law professionals. So that sucks in even more learned people, and basically it starts to grow. Now, Oxford is famous for its colleges. There's 38 colleges in total, and what's called 6 permanent halls. But I'm not going to talk about them because it gets too complicated. But those colleges, the first ones come along in the 1200s. About 1249 is the first college, and that, appropriately enough, is called University College. Before that, all the students that were in the town were in halls, little lodging houses effectively, sometimes run by masters or tutors, sometimes not, and they were for profit. Well, a college is something quite different. A college has its own rules. It's run independently, and it's not just a place where you eat and sleep. It does a lot more. Now, a college has got 4 important things in it. It's got a place to sleep, so that's pretty obvious. It's got a chapel, which is very important, and you'll see what an important role religion plays in the growth of Oxford University if we go around the tour. The next most important thing, and probably fairly obvious, is a library. So all colleges have a library, and the fourth thing they have is a hall. A hall is where communally everybody gets together and eats. In medieval times, the hall was the only place with about heating as well, with about one or two big fires, and that's where you went to get warm. After you left there was no heating in any of the medieval colleges. Now those, as I say, from 3 colleges in the 1200s, it's grown to there's 38 colleges now. Now, Oxford University, in line with Cambridge University. Now, should I just say, we don't refer to Cambridge as Cambridge and Oxford, we call it the other place. Okay? So if you hear me refer to it again, you must tell me off, because it is the other place. So, these colleges start and they grow, but what is the relationship between the college and the university? Well, the university exists before the colleges. Okay? The university sets the curriculum, the subjects that are going to be taught. It also conducts the examinations in that curriculum, and it's the university that awards you a degree. However, when you apply to Oxford University, you effectively become accepted by an individual college. And if you're accepted by a college, you become part of the university. So, how do you apply to get into Oxford University? Well, about approximately 19,000 people a year apply to be undergraduates at Oxford. Of those, only just over 3,000 are going to get in. Okay? So only 1 in 6 people that apply get into Oxford University. Very difficult place to get into. What happens is they apply in September. If they're lucky, they get an interview. Now, that interview, when you apply, you can put down a preference for a college. So a college over there is Balliol College. You might say, I'd like to go to Balliol, so you put a preference for that. If you get selected for interview, that may well be at Balliol College because you've expressed a preference. But other colleges might pick up your application as well. So you might be fortunate to get one at, say, Lincoln College as well, because they like the look of it. Just because you got an interview at 2 colleges does not mean you're going to get in. In fact, my nephew had two interviews at 2 colleges, failed to get in, because you still only have a 1 in 3 chance of getting through to get a place at Oxford. So, how it works is, you get into a college. That college is your home, effectively, the whole time you're here. You become a member of that college, it looks after you like a family, and it's very enclosed, so you feel like it's a family. But there's something distinct about Oxford and the other place that's different to other universities. So in a normal university, you might go to a hall of residence and have lectures in the university. In Oxford, you also have lectures in the university, or you might go to the science buildings to do practical examinations. But in addition to that, you will have a tutor in your college. So he will be, if you're doing history of art, you will have a tutor in your college who will help you with your history of art on a 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 basis. Okay? So in addition to your lectures, your practicals, you've got that extra tuition. What that means, unfortunately for the student, is there's no hiding place. He can't be lazy because there's someone in his college keeping an eye on him. He wants to know why his essay's not been done on time. So for that reason, there's a low dropout rate in Oxford, and people tend to do very well. So there's 2 structures of learning going on, and that goes back to ancient times, basically. Now, that's a basic... Has everyone understood that relationship between the colleges and the universities? Because I didn't understand it for about 30 years. I'm still reading to understand various bits. Now, I just want to say that Oxford is not just about the university. Although having said that, there's actually 2 universities in Oxford. There's Oxford University and there's Brookes University, which is just 2 miles up the road. Oxford has 23,000 students. That's more or less split half and half between undergraduates and postgraduates. And Brookes University has another 18,000 students, so it's another big university. If you add in all the people that work at the university into the students, that's almost 50,000 people are associated with one or the other university. And the population of Oxford is only 160,000. So a third of the people in Oxford are are in some way related to university. In addition to that, lots of people like me make extra living off the university. There is other industry in Oxford. There's a car industry in Oxford. Have you all heard of the mini car? Well, the mini car was first designed in Oxford, built in Oxford, 1959, first block of production. It's still being built today by BMW. There's a factory about 3 miles away, highly robotised, produces 1,000 minis a day, most of which go to export. So it's a really big thriving industry. And there's lots of spin-offs from the university as well. Science parks all the way around Oxford. So Oxford's a very thriving, busy place. A lot of it due to the university, but not everything. Okay? Any questions?
Is there a restriction on limit on foreign students who may have an intake?
Right, that's a good question actually. There's no specific restriction on foreign students other than in medicine. They're only allowed, I think it's about 14 undergraduates in medicine a year, and not all those are taken up. And that's because the government's insisted that we want doctors for the UK. You know, what I would say is 80% of the undergraduates are from the UK. Another 7% are from the EU, but that might change now. And the other 12% are from the rest of the world. Okay? But in terms of applications, there's a lot more from the rest of the world that don't get in. Okay? So you could say if there's a fall off from the EU, there's plenty of people waiting from the rest of the world to come in. Any other questions? Right, we booked into the Divinity School in about 9 minutes, okay? So we're going to work our way there. Just before we're going to get there, we're going to stop outside the Sheldonian Theatre. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that and look at the outside Divinity School before we go in. Just to point out a few things, this is Broad Street. Where you stood now would have originally been the ditch of the old medieval city. Just behind you here was running the medieval wall, because it was a fortified town back in those. It's Oxford surrounded on 3 sides by water, the River Cherwell, and 2 sides of the River Thames, or Isis as it's called in Oxford. This northern side of Oxford is the only bit not defended by water, so that's why this had a ditch. It's also the place in 1555 and 1556 that 3 bishops were burnt at the stake by Queen Mary, or as she's known, Bloody Mary, at the time of the Reformation. Okay, and that took place just over there. Poor old Archbishop Cranmer, who was burned 6 months later in 1556, had to watch the burning of 2 bishops first. Not much, not very nice. Anyway, we're going to go back onto the pavement because we need to be careful. I need to be careful when we're all crossing the way about everyone gathered. About the tuition fees or the fee to be at the university. If you're a UK student, you pay the normal rate for any university in the UK, which is just over £9,000 a year. If you're from the EU, you pay exactly the same amount of money at the moment. That will probably change. But if you're from outside the UK or the EU, you'll pay a lot more, and it depends on the course that you're doing. I believe it starts at about £15,000 and goes upwards. Some of the postgraduate courses are up to £25,000 a year, so it's actually quite expensive. But despite that, it's still oversubscribed in terms of people.
But the UK students, all courses will cost the same as an undergraduate.
For UK, if you went to Sheffield University or Oxford University, exactly the same amount of money.
For all courses though?
Yes.
In Australia you pay more for medicine and law than what you do.
Well, the medicine course is about 7 years, isn't it? So I think you'd end up paying a lot more. I believe it's the same amount of money.
But that's only tuition, right?
Yes, so on top of that, you've got your living expenses.
Right.
So your college fee, you're in your college to eat, and that could be about 5,000 a year, 4,000 to 5,000 a year.
Colleges have different rates.
It depends on the room that you get. We'll see. Some rooms are better than others, so you pay more. Some have their own ensuite facilities, others don't. Some people like to be in the old part of the college, others are in the modern, so it really does vary. But it's about 4,500 to 5,000 a year. And some of those sometimes include your evening meal as well. We'll talk about that when we get to a college day. And if I'm in big trouble if I don't come to school, just say this building here Sheldonian Theatre. It's never been a theatre, okay? It was built specifically for degree ceremonies. So when you get your degree, this is where you come to. The whole service is in Latin, so nobody understands what's going on. Until you hear your name, and then you know it's you that has to step forward to get your degree. This was built by Christopher Wren, very famous architect in the UK, built St Paul's Cathedral in London. This is the second building he ever designs. Okay? And it's a bit weird, actually, you know. And it's because virtually everybody comes to the Sheldonian via the route we've just taken, or that gate over there. Because this is Broad Street, which is the main thoroughfare here. But actually, the city wall used to be here. So when this was built, there were still residents of it, and a ditch over there. So the front is not there, but it's around here, in this cul-de-sac. So let's go forward and have a quick look. 1669 when it was built. And it's got a rather impressive painted ceiling at the top by a chap called Streeter. But as I say, it's difficult to see. Now in addition to degree ceremonies, they also have concerts in there. So you can listen to classical music. And it's lovely to listen to classical music, but I have to say, the seats are very uncomfortable. So if it goes on too long, you need to go to the bar. Okay. Just very quickly, if you look this way, we're going to be going inside in here in a minute. This is the Divinity School. And I want you to take the history, just this centre bit of it. That's the original bit that's built. This end here is added in the 17th century, and so is that end there. But this bit here that we'll be going inside was completed in 1483, a very, very long time ago. And it's the first major building that Oxford University builds. We'll see shortly it's the very first buildings, but this is the first thing that gets a lot of money spent on it. Because the university itself does not have a lot of money. It's the colleges that have all the money. Because the colleges are founded by bishops or wealthy politicians, maybe the Treasurer, the Chancellor of England. They found colleges, they've got lots of money, and they endow those colleges with lots of money. The university is relatively poor. Okay? Just to point out, because I'm going to talk about it whether it's like that building over there is what's called the Chancellor's Court. Okay? And because students could be tried by the Chancellor. Special privilege. Anyway, we've got 30 seconds to get to the end. Okay, keep coming, I need to have you in.
Right.
Have we got any Harry Potter fans here? Oh, quite a few actually. So, in the original, you want to sit down? I'll start with Harry Potter first. It's the most important.
Yes.
Okay, Oxford is a filming location for quite a few scenes in Harry Potter. They obviously love these old buildings, and that's why they use. Now, this particular building, the Divinity School, is the hospital in Harry Potter. At the end of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, he's in hospital. Well, it's in here, just in here. And there's also, he learns to dance in here, in one, I think it's the same film, it could be another one, same place. Unfortunately, we can't go upstairs on this tour, but upstairs is Hogwarts Library.
Oh, shame.
It's called the Duke Humphreys Library, and it's lovely up there. It's a lovely atmosphere. I don't know if you get a chance, there are tours Bodleian do of that building. They're separate tours, but you can book them at the entrance, which is just on the opposite side of the square. We've just come in if you're interested. And of course, in Harry Potter, he has his invisibility cloak, doesn't he? Yeah. And he goes in there and nobody can see him, and it's all very spooky. So yeah, that was shot here. Also, New College, which is just over in that direction, that was the cloister where Malfoy gets turned into a ferret. Remember that? Everyone remember that? Yeah. And Christchurch, which is further over on the other side of the city, was the model for Hogwarts Hall. Okay. They wanted to film in there, but it only had 3 benches, and they need 4 for Hogwarts in the different houses. So that's the Harry Potter. Now, this is a lovely example of what's called perpendicular Gothic architecture. This is an outstanding building. It's very, how do I describe this? It's not chunky. The walls are not very big. They're very thin, but it's really well built. It starts being built in the 1420s. The idea for it comes in the 1420s. This is the Divinity School, specifically for the teaching of theology. Theology is the most important subject in a medieval university. Okay? Now, you could argue it's the least important subject. So, the university builds this for the teaching of theology. The theology school now is in a porter cabin on the outskirts of the town centre. That's how much it's changed in terms of its importance. Now this building here takes nearly 60 years to build. Partly because they keep running out of money. So they'll do a phase of building for 10 years, then they run out of money, they stop. Then they start again, and they stop, start. And it doesn't get completed till 1483. The other thing that's going on at the same time is the War of the Roses. So you've got the Yorkists against the Lancastrians is intermittently going on throughout that period as well. That would have had an effect on finances and the ability to build this actual place here. Now what's outstanding about this building is what you've already noticed, and some of you are looking at the moment, is the ceiling. This is called a learn vaulted ceiling. Those ribs that you see are called learns. I think they're pronounced learns. It could be my Peter Sellers pronunciation. A learn. They look like they're being supported by those pendants that you see that have got saints in them, but they're not. Okay? They're being supported by the outside walls. And this is a trick that they did at the time when they were building this to make it look. You go into Christchurch Cathedral if you get the chance. They've got a very similar one there, which looks, that's called the Star Vault, because it's the shape of the actual learns. Now, you can see all those what's called bosses on the ceiling. There's lots of them with initials on, coats of arms. They're basically people that stumped up money, that gave money for the building of this Divinity School, or specifically the ceiling. The ceiling's built in actually a comparatively short period of time, only about 4 years. And it gets kick-started by a chap called Thomas Kemp. He's the Bishop of London. And you can tell his arms because he's got the wheat sheaths on them. Can you see them up there? That's Thomas Kemp, the Bishop of London. And he gives a big chunk of money that enables this ceiling to be built, basically. Now, if you look at it, it looks like a church, doesn't it? It's specifically designed to look like a church because it's the teaching of theology. And how did they teach? Back in those days, there was no writing paper. No one could afford writing paper. It's only in the Victorian times, in the 19th century, that writing paper becomes economical for lots of people. So they would learn by what's called disputation. Okay? And they would also be examined by disputation. So for most of Oxford University's lives, the examinations took place orally. Okay? So you needed to have a good memory. And a lot of the teaching was done by memory. So you would listen to something, you would repeat it, you would listen again, and you'd repeat it again. So people in those days had much better memories than we do now, because we refer to our computers, to our books, to whatever, to actually remember things. And how the examination would work is someone would stand over there, maybe the tutor or the examiner, and the student would stand over there, and he would say something. And the chap over there would have to respond intelligently, hopefully, about whatever it was. And this would go on for quite some time. And what's happening is he's being tested on his knowledge. He's being given phrases or questions, and he needs to know what he's actually talking about. And I say, that continues. Now, this bit here is the very old bit, 1483. Through that door there is what's called Convocation House. Fortunately, we can't go in there. And that's like a little parliament building. And Convocation is a parliament building for the university. And the people that sit in parliament are basically the masters or tutors of the university. And they get to elect the Chancellor, the Vice-Chancellor, the Professor of Poetry, bizarrely, and they asked to vote on important decisions. That wasn't built until the 17th century, the 1630s. So a lot longer after this was built, that was built. And I pointed it out, the Chancellor's Court over on the right. Basically, if you were a student, you could choose to be, if you were in debt or you committed a crime, you could choose to be tried by the university or the Chancellor. Even if it involved a townsperson and a student, you could be elected to be tried by the Chancellor. Now, the reason people like doing that is the Chancellor tended to be more lenient on you than the local magistrates. Okay? So if you wanted to get off with a small fine, go and see the Chancellor in the Chancellor's Court. There was one slight problem with it: it was more expensive. So, generally speaking, it was the richer students that could afford to be tried there. Now, just at this bit here, where we came to, I'm going to talk about it a little bit more when we go outside, but was built in around 1610. And what happens is, when this is built in 1483, they build the library, as I told you, above, called Duke Humphreys. He gives 281 books. That's a lot of books in those days. But in 1598, the library gets extended, okay, and it gets extended at that end. So upstairs is like a T-shaped extension, if you imagine, to the library. And this is the start, in earnest, of the Bodleian Library. Okay. Bodleian Library, very famous, one of 3 libraries in the country that gets a copy of every book that's published. We'll talk about that in a few more minutes. Right, we've got about 3 more minutes in here. Has anyone got any questions? If you want, you can have a little wander around, and you might want to look at that chest over there, which is Thomas Bodley's chest, okay? And that's where he kept his valuables. So if you have a look at it, there's a really complicated lock mechanism on there, which was not uncommon in that period, okay? And that's how people kept their money, and they still call it the university chest today, which is the money of the university that it has, but back in the day, it really was a chest. And if you're fans of Francis Drake, as I was when I was a kid and watched all those films about him, and he sailed in the Golden Hind, didn't he? You remember the Golden Hind? Well, that chair over there is made of timbers from the Golden Hind. So if you just want to have a wander around for a couple of minutes, I'll have a swig of water.
Did you say where the name Bodley came from? Somebody's name?
Thomas Bodley.
Thomas Bodley.
Yeah. And William Shakespeare apparently wrote sonnets to a W.H. His name was William Herbert, so the thinking is that that was who he wrote his sonnets to. Now, a lady, when I first started learning to be a guide, said to me, "Where's the main bit of the university?" And there is no main bit of the university, because the university is spread all round the town centre. However, if you come here in 1620 and asked me where the main bit of the university was, I would have said here. This is called the Old Schools Quad, and it's also got another name, which is the Bodleian Library. Now that's a bit confusing because it's named after 2 different things. But what happens is that Divinity School is built first, as the first main building that the university builds. In 1610, this end is added to it because there's a library upstairs, Hogwarts Library, or in fact, real life, Duke Humphreys Library up there. And what the university doesn't have are proper rooms for teaching at that time. It has what's described as ruinous little rooms that could be hired. And Thomas Bodley, who builds this bit here, he does rather well. He marries a rich widow. Okay? And she gets her money from her husband, who in turn gets it from pilchard fishing. He becomes very wealthy from fishing for pilchards. Thomas Bodley marries his widow, and he acquires all this wealth. Now, Thomas Bodley, as I say, builds that. He gives 2,500 books to refurbish the library, so he kickstarts what is to become, and named after him, the Bodleian Library, named after Thomas Bodley. But he also wants to improve the teaching at this university. So he arranges for the old buildings to be knocked down and for this new quad to be built. He himself never sees it completed because he dies in 1613. But it gets completed about 1620. Now, if you look round above the doors, you can see the subjects that were taught in each room, okay? Everything's in Latin.
No.
The language you use at Oxford University to teach, to learn is Latin. Not English, it's Latin.
But
Not now, no. Hardly anyone speaks Latin now. Okay. The good thing about speaking Latin is it's an international language. If you want to go to Paris and teach, you can teach in Latin. If you want to go to Rome, you can teach. You can travel anywhere in the world if you speak Latin and teach people. So, what would happen in 1620, the students come along and they go to the different rooms depending on what subjects they were learning. Now, they were still learning the same subjects that were pretty much around in medieval times. So that's grammar, logic, rhetoric, and then what's called the mathematical arts, music, strangely enough, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. Those are the 7 main subjects that you would learn. Okay? After 3 years, you would get your Bachelor of Arts, your BA or degree as it was called then. After 4 more years, you would become a Master of whatever it was, Master of Arts. That was linked to the medieval guild system. If you were a carpenter and you learned your skills as a carpenter, it took 7 years. At the end of that 7 years, you were a master. The university copied exactly the same period of time. Now, this gentleman asked me a question about who was teaching at the university. What the system was that once you'd completed your master's degree after 7 years, you were then expected to teach. So you would teach the younger people. In fact, you would even start teaching when you got your BA. You would start to do some teaching. But teaching in earnest when you got your master's degree. And if you wanted to do something in addition to that, there were the 3 other subjects that were for your doctorate. And that was medicine, law, and you guessed it, theology. Theology is still the most important subject in a medieval university. Okay? Obviously law for obvious reasons and medicine, but obviously when I talk about medicine, I'm not referring to it as we know it now, because medicine is only in the 18th, 19th century that really improves. Now this is a wonderful building, and on the first 2 floors are where the teaching was going on. But the top floor, that was an art gallery originally. This is the university's first art gallery. And this was a common thing. When people built libraries, they often made an art gallery there as well. And the 3rd floor was for paintings, but also for the storage of pictures. Sorry, for books, not pictures. So, as books were coming along, they were stored in these rooms for access by the library. Now, there's an important point to make here. In 1610, Thomas Bodley does a deal which has had ramifications ever since. He arranges that the Bodleian Library, it wasn't called the Bodleian Library then, it is now, gets a copy of every book published in the UK. Now, back in 1610, that's not a lot of books. Okay? Fast forward to today, and the Bodleian Library now has 13 million books. And that's a problem. That's a lot of books to store. I'm going to be taking you outside in a minute and you will see where some of those books are stored. But it's so many books now that they're not even all stored in Oxford. Some are stored in Swindon and they're brought to Oxford every day. Now, if you're a university student, you have unlimited access to the Bodleian Library. So you get a university Bodleian card when you join, or a university card, and that gives you access to all the universities in all the libraries in Oxford, basically. That's actually a relatively recent phenomenon. If you were in 1620 and went in there to do some philosophy and thought, oh, I'll pop upstairs and have a look for a philosophy book, you couldn't. Only masters could access the library in those days. And it's not until the 1850s that undergraduate students could access the Bodleian Library. They could, of course, access their own college libraries. As we'll see, as we said before, all colleges had their own library. So, now I just want to point out that tower over there, because when they built this, they thought, you know what, we're just not going to have a boring little entrance. We're going to have a spectacular entrance. And that, I think you'd agree, is quite spectacular. On there are 5 different types of columns, or orders as they're called, and they depict the different type of classical columns that you will see all around the country in Greece, Rome, whatever. At the bottom you've got the plainest, which is the Tuscan. The second one is called Doric. The third one is Ionic, with those scrolls on the top. Next one up is Corinthian, which has got those leaves. Yeah, a lot of royal palaces will have Corinthian columns on them. And then right at the top you've got what's called Composite, and that's a combination of the Ionic and the Corinthian. Excuse me. Now, I expect you're wondering, who sat up there? Well, have we got any Scottish people here? No? Okay. That's James I. If there have been some Scottish people here, it would have been James VI of Scotland. Okay? He's the first king that unifies the throne of Scotland and England. And he just happens to be on the throne when this building's built. Okay? Above him it says, "Blessed is the peacemaker," because James is not keen on war and keeps England out of that disastrous 30 years war that's raging in Europe at the time. But he's surrounded by 2 angels. One blowing the trumpet is the angel for fame, and the one on the right is the angel of learning. So why, in addition, apart from the fact he's king, why is his statue there? Well, actually, James I considered himself a bit of an author, and he writes quite a few books. And 2 of the books he writes, one's on witchcraft. What he knew about witchcraft, I don't know. But he argued they really were witches. But the other book, one of the other books he writes about is the evils of tobacco. So he was against smoking even back in 1620. And the officer basically he was dead right about that. Now, originally, that picture of James was painted in gold. And the story goes that James was just up the road, hunting probably, and the university invited him to come and see his statue. But it was a bright August day, and he didn't have any sunglasses in those days. And he came in here, and the sun on that gold was so dazzling that you couldn't look at it. And he went, no, that's no good. You need to paint it a different colour. So it was painted as lifelike, shall we say, that statue, but unfortunately the paint's worn off over the years and it's never been replaced. I should say that even though this building goes back to 1620, it has been refaced many times, because one of the problems in Oxford is that the stonework doesn't last very long. Originally, Oxford would have looked very different to what it looks now. It would have been using originally Headington stone, which is a local quarry, then it used stone from the Cotswolds of Burford, and it was a much greyer colour. So if you come to Oxford 150 years ago, it didn't have this honey-coloured look that you see now. It would have been much, much greyer, and the whole city would have been a greyer stone, basically, to look at. Any questions? Sorry, did that answer your question? When I get to the college, I'm going to talk about fellows of colleges, because they do teaching as well, and that's where it gets confusing. Okay. Right, we're going to pop through this entrance here. I don't think the people who are supposed to join us have caught up, so we'll press on, and we're going to go into Radcliffe Square now, and I'll tell you a bit about the iconic building.
Vil du tage et billede af mig senere der? Jo. Jeg går ind i. Eller hvad?
Ja. Hvor blev de af?
De er der. Ah, der med den lille dreng på hovedet.
Ah.
Because it's the one that everybody sees. If you look for an image of Oxford, this is invariably the one that you see. But I want to talk first about the church behind me. Now, I've lived in Oxford for 40 years, And I never paid much attention to this church behind me for about 35 of those years. I knew it was a church, I knew it was some way linked with the university, but that was about it. Actually, this is where Oxford University starts. This church building is where everything goes on to do with the university in its very early days, until that building of that Divinity School and the Sheldonian Theatre that you saw over there. This is where everything takes place. Okay? Now, just to point out, over on the left-hand side of the building there, you see those Gothic windows on the ground floor. They're actually on the first floor. There is a room below them. And that room below them is now a cafe, and you can go in there and have a cup of coffee, and it's a nice place to go. But it's the original, what was called Congregation House there, where the people that ran the university met, where the professors, if you like, of their day, the tutors, the masters, that's where they congregated to make decisions about the university and its running. It's also where they had a chest of money so that people could borrow money, or if they wanted to take out a book, which they could in those days, they'd leave money for that book, to the value of that book, because books were obviously very expensive in those days. And just above that, in the room where you can see on the first floor with the windows, that's the university's first library. Okay? It dates back to 1320, those buildings, and that's the very first library of Oxford University. And that basically remains the library of the university till it's replaced by Duke Humphreys' library that we were seeing over there.
What's the name of that church?
The oldest bit, sorry.
Sorry, what's the name of the church?
It's the University Church of St Mary.
Thank you.
The oldest bit of that church is actually the tower, or the main bottom half of the tower, or up to about 3/4 of the way up the tower. That dates from the end of the 1200s, and as you go up, it's a little bit later, the 1300s, but it was all renovated in the 19th century. And only one of the statues is the original one, all the others are from the 19th century. You can go up that tower, I don't know if you can see, sometimes you can see people wandering around. It's 129 steps, so you need to be feeling a bit athletic. But if you do go up, it costs £4, you get a fantastic view of the whole of this area. There's sometimes a queue though, because it's very popular. Just very quickly, I mentioned the Chancellor's Court before. This is the Chancellor's Court originally. This building here on the right in the foreground that mirrors that one was where students could go to be tried. And the main nave, which you see behind it, was built in around 1500, just after 1500. And that was where a lot of lectures, disputations would go on, and where the degree ceremonies took place for the university in the early days, and carried on until the Sheldonian Theatre was built in 1669. So as I say, in a way, that's a very important building in the history of the university. Now, just to give you some context, behind you is Brasenose College. That was founded in 1509, but most of the buildings date from the 17th century. Famous people that have been there, David Cameron, who's Prime Minister. Incidentally, in the history of Prime Ministers, there have been 56 Prime Ministers, okay, in the UK. Of those 56, 42 came from either Oxford or the other place. Okay? Of those 42, 27 came from Oxford. Okay? So the lion's share, only 15 from the other place. And 13 of the 27 came from one college, but it wasn't that one. Okay, it was Christ Church. 13 Prime Ministers, one college. Quite staggering statistic. Now, we can't ignore this building here. If you Google Oxford images, it's always the Radcliffe camera that comes up. So-called. Lots of people think that's an important main building of the university. It's actually the History Faculty Library. Okay? Now, originally, it dates back to the 18th century. A chap called John Radcliffe, which this square and that building takes its name from, was a surgeon to the monarchs, to William and Mary specifically, at the end of the 17th century. And he gets very rich, as he's a very good doctor. But he has no children. So when he dies, he leaves the money to Oxford University, and specifically this £40,000, which is a lot of money in those days, for the building of a science library. And he dies in 1714. The only slight problem is that he says, you can't have it till my sisters die. Okay? He's got two younger sisters. They don't die until the 1730s, 1736. It's only after that that they start building this place. But he also has another proviso of that they can only have the £40,000 in 4,000 a year. Okay? It takes them 12 years to build this building here. As you can see, it's classical architecture. Generally, if things are built in the 18th century, they're classical in design. Okay? If they're earlier than that, or built in the 19th century, the earlier they're Gothic, and the 19th century mimics that Gothic in a lot of buildings that you see. The exception to that, the Ashmolean Museum on Beaumont Street, which is also classical, Greek-Roman in style. The architect of this was a chap called James Gibbs. So how did he get the job? Well, actually, he got the job because he's the last man standing. They asked quite a lot of architects, you know, Christopher Wren, Nicholas Hawksmoor, famous architects, and they all die one by one, leaving just James Gibbs to finish the job. Now, as I say, it was designed to be a science library, which is a bit ironic because apparently John Radcliffe hated referring to books. Yet he leaves this money specifically for a science library. Originally, only the top floor was the library. The bottom floor was an open area, it was an open concourse where you could walk around, basically. That changes in about 1910. In 1910, it becomes a storage area for books, and then later it's converted to another reading room, basically. It's part of the Bodleian Library. And when we walked over from the Old Schools quad, across those cobblestones like this, we were actually walking over part of the Bodleian Library, because between this building here and that building there are tunnels. And there's storage, we walked on top of 250,000 books in that area alone. It's called the Gladstone Link, the tunnel. And that tunnel goes all the way from this building here, through the Old Schools quad, across that road that we came down originally, and onto the other side of the road. And all this was part of the university's attempts to keep up with the number of books that it was actually printing. Now, when you Google images of Oxford and you see this building, you usually see that one behind it. Now, that's All Souls colleges, All College, sorry. Now, in Oxford, there are colleges with small number of students, like Corpus Christi, only 350. You've got Keble, which has got nearly 900. That's a college with no students. The only people in there, and there's 80 of them, are researchers, okay? Specifically doing research into all sorts of different world problems, or issues, or history, or law, or all sorts of things. It was founded in the 15th century, in the 1430s. It was called All Souls because it was meant to be pray for the souls of the departed in the 100 Years' War. Lots of people had died between France and England in the 100 Years' War. And they were going to pray for them, but also the idea was, behind that college, is it would be like to teach people skills that would enable the nation to improve in ways other than war. So law, history, all those. Who's working on the sugar plantations? Slaves. Okay? You could argue that that library was funded off the back of slave labour, which is obviously not a very nice thing. You can rarely get in, you can only get into the Codrington Library once a year when they have an open day, and I went in there a few weeks ago just to see inside. It's interesting because the architecture on the outside is still Gothic. It's a kind of mild Gothic in that nice sandstony finish, but it's still Gothic. But if you go inside the library, it becomes classical architecture. Nicholas Hawksmoor, the architect, pulls off the trick of having Gothic on the outside, classical on the inside. So you get a kind of round windows and everything in there. It's absolutely beautiful, wood-panelled place to go, actually, and hardly used, probably. So it's not what you call a normal college, that, but it's quite important in the development of Oxford. Okay, any questions on the buildings here?
You do have to have a degree in Oxford to be one of the 18 researchers.
If you want to apply to be one of the that passes by examination, then you have to have a degree at Oxford, yes.
All right.
You could be invited to become a member, and you could have a degree somewhere else. I think that does happen.
All right.
Okay. So we're going to work our way we'll go back round this way just so you can see the front of the college, and you can peer through the gates if you want as we go. And we're going to go over towards Hartford College, and I'm going to show you the second most photographed place in Oxford. There. Now, just over there you can see what's called in Oxford the Bridge of Sighs. Obviously the real Bridge of Sighs is in Venice and connects the old palace with the prison. It actually doesn't look very much like the Bridge of Sighs, to be honest. It looks slightly more like the Rialto Bridge in Venice, which is much bigger, but it is Venetian in style. If you look at those round windows at the top. Now it's not really that old. It was built in 1914. And its function was to connect two halves of one college. So over on the right there is Hartford College, and over on the left there is Hartford College. And they're obviously separated by a road. Now for a lot of time in the 19th century, if you were in Hartford College accommodation, which is on that side, and you wanted to go to the main administrative block or the chapel, you had to go outside, down the road and back through the entrance. Now, if you want to use the library late at night, then that's not very good, particularly in winter. It's very cold. And the libraries now are open 24/7. I don't think quite open 24/7 now, then, but they're very late at night. So they wanted to build that bridge to connect them. Some unscrupulous guides will tell you that the toilets were on one side and the accommodation on the other. That's not actually the case. Now, it takes 20 years to get that built. It doesn't look much for 20 years, does it? And just like today, there was problems with planning applications. Okay? And specifically, a college objected to it. That college is New College. Not very new, by the way. It's founded in 1379. Okay? Well, just behind that bridge, can you see that tower? That's the bell tower of New College. And the warden of New College objected to that bridge being built because he said it spoilt the view of his tower. And it kind of does a little bit, actually. Now, Harry Potter people, listen up. See that bell tower? Well, it's just near there. There's a cloister, like a quadrangle, and that's where Harry Potter, part of Harry Potter was shot, in the cloisters there. Well, my fault was turned into a ferret. And that very spot just over there. Why is it called the Bridge of Sighs? Just because it looks a bit like the Bridge of Sighs. That's the reason. There's no other reason. If you watch the Antiques Roadshow, you're from the UK. Fiona Bruce went to this college, Hartford College. Natasha Kaplinsky also went to this college over here. It's one of the first colleges that allows women into the college. Okay? There's no mixed colleges in Oxford until 1974. I can't believe it's 1974, but it is 1970. I actually came here in 1975. And there were five male colleges that allow women in, and Hartford was one of those colleges. And we're going to be going into one in 6 minutes. That was one of the others. Just 5 colleges in 1974, and then the rest gradually followed. There were women's colleges before then, 1879, and then added to that, there were 5 women's colleges in total. And the last college that becomes co-educational for men and women was actually a women's college, St Hilda's in 2008. It was the last one to have men and women in the same college. Okay. Now, I just want to point out this building over here very quickly because we've got to get a move on to Hartford College. So this is called the Clarendon Building. It's named after the Earl of Clarendon. He gets very wealthy writing a book about the English Civil War. And his son uses that money to build this. Now it's a very posh-looking classical building with those lovely columns there, but what was its function? Its function originally was a printing press. Okay? It doesn't look like nowadays, if you had a printing press, it'd be located on an industrial estate on the outskirts of town. Printing was very big then. It's new technology. It was the thing, printing. Now, they had something very special to print in there. The Oxford University Press, which is still going today, still famous. It prints the Bible. It has a monopoly on the James I Bible. The James I Bible is the biggie when it comes to Bibles. It's partly translated in Oxford as well, and they have a monopoly on printing it. And they print the Bible on this right-hand side of the building, and they make lots of money from it. And the money they make from printing that Bible pays for academic printing on the left-hand side of the building. Sorry? It's actually the office of the Vice-Chancellor now, so it's just used as offices. But what you'll notice, it's got very big windows. The big windows will allow a lot of light in, which you need when you're actually doing the printing. So it's a lovely old building. It kind of is the entrance to this area here. So remember, the ditch is originally over there. There's orchards and things over in that direction, originally. It's farmland as you go a bit further on. This is kind of giving an entrance to the university area. The area we've just been in is what you call the university area, or university quarter. Right, now we're just going to take a walk down and we're going to go inside Wadham College. Okay? So if you just follow me, we're going to go down this road. But I want to cross this road over here. Just come a little bit closer so I don't shout and disturb people. This college dates back to the early 1600s and was completed in about 1613. It took 4 years. It's incredible that they've managed to build the college in 4 years. I'll talk to you about in the quad when we go outside, tell you a bit more about that. Now, I said to you earlier that every college has a chapel. Some of the more modern ones on the outskirts of the town centre don't, okay? But all the old colleges in the centre of Oxford, they all have chapels. And they're all on basically the same design, which is a T-shape. Okay? So what you're seeing here is the flat bit is called the antechapel, this area here. Okay? And we're going to go into what's referred to either as the chancel or the choir, which is the next section or the main bit of the actual chapel. Now you see I say chapel, I don't say church. I got told off in my early training for referring to them as churches. They're quite different from churches. There's no nave in a chapel. Normally churches are cross-shaped, but these are not. Now in the antechapel, this, in addition to, obviously it's got a religious function, got the organ which is over there. That's a 19th century organ, by the way. So it's not original from the time of the building of the college. And in fact, all these stained glass windows that you see in the antechapel are all from the 19th century. You're going to see them from a different century when we go into the chancel. And the function of this was often used for little meetings or little group discussions between people. Or if they were looking for space, they might actually use the antechapel as an area to do that. But often, as you'll see around here, there's also memorials to famous or rich students often, who have families who died and they're associated with this college and they can pay to have a memorial put up. Now I want to draw your attention to this one in particular. His name is Thomas Harris. And he dies in 1614 and he's only 20 and he's a fellow of the college. Now I told you before that it took 7 years to become a master to be able to teach. And I got caught out on a tour the other day and someone said, how can someone die at 20 if they're a fellow of the college, if it takes 7 years to actually pass all your examinations to be a master? Well, what I was talking about was teaching in the university. When it comes to the colleges, they've got freedom. They do what they want. So in addition to masters and tutors in the college, you would also have people that are given honorary fellowships, or they might be connected. Now, the woman responsible for this college, really, and I'll tell you more about this later, is Dorothy Hwadam. She appoints all the original fellows of the college back in 1613. And Thomas Harris was obviously one of them, because he dies in 1614, yet he's only 20. Now, I don't know how he becomes a fellow that early, but it could be that she had to grease a lot of palms to buy the land, to get permission. It could be he was the son of somebody important that became a fellow for that reason. It could be that he already had a degree, a BA. Remember, back in those days, you didn't have to be 18 to start your degree course. You could be 16, 15, or sometimes younger. So sometimes people that got their degrees or even master's degrees could be 22, 23, not very old at all, actually. And remember, people didn't live that long in those days. So if you're going to take a long time to get your qualifications, you might be dead before you get to use them. So, that's tragically that he dies so young at 20, and this dates back to this memorial dates back to the original 17th century chapel. So this document's obviously this is the John Portman, I think, and his family are much richer, so he gets a much bigger memorial. He dies at 19 actually, but he's not a fellow of the college, he's just an undergraduate student, basically. Okay, any questions in here before we go into the Chancellor?
Yeah, so those, if I understood you correctly, the different colleges that can award fellowships to whoever
Yes,
they like.
and still do, yes.
All right.
So you would have visiting fellowships, you would have people that genuinely are professors at the university, or you might even have, I know on Hartford College, I was chatting to someone last night, a long-standing worker in the college who would say the bursar, they might be given a fellowship. And if you're a fellow, that entitles you to eat at the top table in the hall and various other perks associated with being with the college. Okay, let's go and move into the Chancellor. Now this is a fairly typical chapel in the college, and I think you'd agree it's beautiful. All this woodwork dates back to the original building of the college in the early 1600s, including that wooden screen that you see there that separates the antechapel from the chancel. And this is a feature you'll see in virtually every chapel in Oxford. They all have these screens that separate the two areas. Now there's something a little bit different about a chapel and a church, and I wonder if you've realised what it is yet. It's the seating arrangement. Normally in a church, all the seats face the altar. Here, everyone's facing each other. Now this goes back to the monastic traditions of the university in its early days. When Oxford starts as a university in the 12th century, in the early 13th century and 12th century, monastic houses moved to Oxford. They come from Italy, they bypass London, and they come to this small provincial town in the middle of nowhere, which it was then. We still don't know why they all came to Oxford, what it was, the air or whatever, but they came. And they were interlinked with the early days of the university. The monastic houses and the universities went hand in hand. A lot of the senior people in the monastic houses taught at the university, and a lot of the monks were in the university. If you saw a medieval student, he looked like a monk. He had a tonsure, so he was bald on the top, and he wore a monk's gowns. That's how you could tell who he was a student, basically. And as I said, they all spoke Latin. Now, that tradition of monastic tradition is of chanting, and it's called Antiphonal Chanting, where one side would sing some verse or some psalms, and then the other side would respond, and this would go on. And this was what happened in these chapels. Obviously, only men were in these chapels originally, because only men are in the university. But just to give you a little story about Trinity College, which is just on Broad Street where we came past, the only person that could marry in a college was the head of the college. So in Wadham it'd be the warden of the college, in Trinity it's the president. All the colleges' heads have different names. Some are called rectors, some are called wardens here. Now in Trinity College, the house where the president lived was next door to the chapel, and he had a secret passage built so that his wife could attend the services. And she didn't sit in these seating that you see here. She had a little cupboard with a window on the front, and she would go from the secret passage into this cupboard and listen to the service and then go back down the secret passage. And she couldn't be seen the whole time. She was there. Anyway, it's all changed now and completely different. This now has, obviously it's a mixed college, has been since 1974, has a choir here as well. Most of the colleges have choirs. There's 3 big choirs in Oxford. That's at Christ Church, which is the big college, and also the Cathedral for the city, very unusual. Magdalen College, which has got a fame, they're called foundation choirs, and New College. Those are the 3 big choirs. They're seriously professional choirs that go around the world entertaining. This has a choir made up of students, male and female, from the college. Okay. And they will sing in this particular chapel once a week. evensong on Sunday. And there are prayers here during the week. Now, chapels are important because until the 19th century, it was compulsory to go to chapel if you went to university. Everyone at college had to be ticked off on a register effectively for chapel, and that only ends towards the end of the 19th century. And some of the chapels that are in Oxford get rebuilt because they're not big enough in the 19th century, early 19th century. So they knock down an old chapel and they build another one, and that's what happens at Exeter. And the main reason for that is they need more capacity as the university expands. In 1300, there's just 1,500 students. Now there's 23,000. So what you're seeing is a land grab by the university in the city. So you came here in 1300, as a leading professor once told me, you'd barely know there was a university here. You come here now and the university owns much of the town centre, apart from some shopping space on the west. Now, I mentioned that the stained glass windows in the antechapel were 19th century, but these windows that you see around here date back to the 17th century. So they're slightly after the building was built. These windows were put in the 1630s. And the man that's responsible for them is a chap called Bernard van Link. Now he's got a brother called Abraham van Link, and the two Van Link brothers, if you like, are pretty big in Oxford in the 17th century. And a lot of chapels, a few chapels have their stained glass windows. Okay, University Chapel has, Christ Church has got them. Now what they're doing is they're using painted or enamel paint techniques for stained glass. So this is not like medieval stained glass where you would cut the shapes out of coloured glass and put it together. They're actually painting on the glass, and you get much more detail as a result of it. And if you look at these pictures, you can see tremendous detail in the stained glass. You can see, landscapes and buildings in the background. Absolutely fantastic. And these two brothers were really big in terms of doing this because of their skills. They came from Emden, which I think is on the Dutch-German border, and that's where they came over here and they spent a long time here because there's so many chapels to have stained glass. And that's a particularly magnificent one over there, which shows the Passion and the Ascension of Christ. I'd say that they're really good examples of it. Now, a lot of what you see does go back to the 17th century. This floor is from the 17th century, this checkerboard floor. The pulpit is the original pulpit, over here on the right. But that stone was called a reredos. I don't know if you've heard of a reredos before, but it's big stonework, it's often behind the altar. That's Victorian. And there will be a lot of renovation work in the centuries that follow the 17th century on these chapels, as all buildings in Oxford, because they slowly fall down, basically. And a lot of the budgets of the Oxford colleges is in refurbishing their old buildings, and wonderful buildings like this. Trinity College was recently completely redone out because it had dry rot and woodworm and all sorts of problems like that. I think you'd agree these are absolutely wonderful buildings. And, anyone got any questions on the chapel? Any questions? Anyone, by the way, can come into a service when it's on. So if you were in here at 6 o'clock on a Sunday, you're quite welcome to come in and enjoy the service. And if you do want to go to an evensong tonight, you go to Christ Church. They have an evensong every night about 6 o'clock. Yeah, I think it's 6 or 6:20, something around there, Christ Church. And you can go at that time, quarter of an hour before then, you can go through the main entrance of Christ Church, which you can't normally. If you go into the service, you can go in through there, the big Tom Tower on St Aldate's. If anyone wants, I can show them where that is later if anyone wants to go. And it's well worth going, because that is the cathedral for the diocese of Oxford as well. So if you're a local citizen, you're like I am, I live in Oxford, I'm entitled to go into that college free of charge, because the cathedral's there, and it's my cathedral. So if you have an what's called an OX2 or OX1 postcode, you can go in there. Otherwise you have to pay. But not when the service is on, so it's free of charge to get in there, and it's well worth seeing because it's a beautiful the original cathedral is Norman, so it's very old. And lots of lovely stained glass in there as well. Okay, we're going to go out now and we're going to have a look at a little bit of the grounds, and then we're going to go into the quad, and I'll tell you about the quad and the history of the building of this particular college. Expert on trees. Anyone recognise this one? I think is it a redwood? A giant redwood? It's certainly fairly giant by British standards, anyway. You know. But what happens when this is acquired by the family that build Wadham College, which I'll tell you a bit more about in the quad, they acquire all this land that you see here. Now, when we cross the road to get here, where there's a pub on the corner, basically all the land from that corner up to beyond that wall there, because there's another garden belongs to this college just beyond that wall. It's private for the fellows. All this belongs to Wadham, but if you've gone down that other road on that corner, you've gone down there quite a way, that all belongs to Wadham. So it's only the pub on the corner that is not actually part of Wadham College. So this college is one of the bigger colleges in Oxford, but it doesn't look like it when you come in. 650 students at this particular college. Okay, 450 of them are undergraduates, 250 are graduate students. So it's quite a big college in Oxford terms. It's also got a reputation as a very liberal college. So it's big on gay rights and things like that. When they had Gay Rights Week, they were flying the flag from Wadham College, you know. And one of the most famous wardens was into gay rights, but wouldn't have said it at the time because he was a warden here till 1970. Okay? He was a chap called Max Bowrer. Now he was well known as being a wit, as being really funny. Okay? And there's lots of stories about him. Okay? I'll tell you one story about him. There used to be a nude bathing area on the river, just over in that direction. Now I remember when I was in here, as a student here in 1975, punting. Have you all heard of punting? A boat with a pole? Well, you punt down the river and you come up to some rollers where you have to go up them to get onto a higher part of the river. And just to your left as you get over there was the nude bathing area. So we'd be mixed group, boys and girls, you know. And what was supposed to happen was all the girls were meant to avert their eyes. Of course, none of them did, or if they did, they went like this. And Maurice Bowrer was stood there one day because he enjoyed nude bathing, along with lots of other Oxford dons. And as this boat came by with the women, all the dons picked up their shirts and covered their private parts, apart from Maurice Bowrer, who covered his face. And he turned to the others and he said, "Well, I don't know about you gentlemen, but I'm much better known in Oxford for my face than for any other parts of my body." True story, apparently. Now, the Wardens Lodgings are over in that corner. You can't quite see them, but in that corner of the quad over there. And apparently, there used to be a curfew in the college that you weren't allowed out after 9 o'clock. They did make it later. And if you were out later, they would lock the door. If you wanted to get back in, you have to climb over a wall or find some way back in. Well, apparently, and I found this difficult to believe, but one of the potential routes back in was through the Wardens Lodgings. Okay? Now, I guess this was if he left a window open or something. I wonder whether he did it deliberately, actually. You could sneak through the Warden's lodging, but it was a fairly risky thing to do. Now, the story I've heard about Maurice Bowrer, apparently a student was engaged in sneaking through the Warden's lodgings. Just at the moment, Maurice walked into the room. The student quickly dived behind the sofa, and Bowrer went in, picked up a book and started reading. And he read for about 3 hours. And at the end of that 3 hours, he got up, put the book back. Just as he got to the door, he said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind turning the light up, old chap, as we leave." So the story was he knew he was there all along. And there are lots of stories like that about him and the way what went on here, basically. But I just want to bring you out here because it's a lovely area. Now, Oxford also was the capital of England for one period in England's history, and that was in the English Civil War. The English Civil War between the monarch and Parliament, which of course Parliament wins, and poor old Charles I gets his head chopped off. Anyway, before that, he comes to Oxford and this becomes the capital. This is the royalist capital. But it needs earthquake, it needs defending, and the old city wall is not going to do it. It's not built to withstand gunpowder, basically. So they build these massive earth ramparts around the city, and they've all disappeared. Now, if I took you over to, there's a gate in that corner, and just through there, you can see one of the surviving earth ramparts from the defence of the city. And only there is it still left in the whole of Oxford, just through there. So for me, that's really exciting. I get excited about Earth Rampart. So this is where the students can go, but there's a garden over there which is also called the Fellows Garden, which is specifically restricted for the Fellows of the university. And then just beyond there is Rhodes House. Have you all heard of Cecil Rhodes?
Yes.
Well, he starts diamond mines, De Beers in South Africa. Becomes very rich, very controversial character, an imperialist, not very popular with students today, or lots of people actually. But he makes a lot of money, and he builds Rhodes House in the 1920s. But he also endows a scholarship, so you can become a Rhodes Scholar. Okay, and come to the university off the back of that Rhodes Scholarship. He pays for everything. Bill Clinton, he was a Rhodes Scholar. Okay, and when Bill Clinton famously smoked marijuana but didn't inhale, that was in Oxford when he was a student. And lots of Bob Hawke, he was a Rhodes Scholar as well, from Australia. But as I say, he's a bit of a controversial character, but there are still Rhodes Scholars today. In the main, they come from what's called the old Empire countries, or the Commonwealth as it's called now. But rather oddly, they always included Germany as well. And the reason for that was that in Germany, they started to introduce English lessons. So Cecil Rhodes said because they introduced English lessons, they could become Rhodes Scholars as well. But these days, Rhodes Scholars come from lots of other countries as well, so not just the old Commonwealth countries, additional countries from around the world. Okay, now we're going to take a little walk back. There's another group coming, so we'll sneak past them and go into the quad. Now, quads are synonymous with Oxford and the other place, okay? They're the framework upon which a college is built around. Now, in the first college to have a quad is Merton College, and that's back in the 14th century. And that sets the tone for all the other colleges that come along afterwards. And what the quad will include is all the important things for a college. So when this college gets built in 1613, what you see around you is virtually the whole of the college. Okay? Bits have been added, but this is the very original college with its 3 floors of accommodation. So we've just been in the chapel, that's on the left. On the right, normally next to the chapel, is the hall. So in there, that's where the students would eat. Now often, there's a library in here as well. In this particular case, the library runs off from that wall down there. You carry on, the original library carries on past there, so you can't actually see it. Now, the thing about libraries, they're always built on the first floor, never the ground floor. And the reason for that is damp. Oxford's a very damp place. It sits in a bowl with rivers. The water level below is quite high, actually, as anyone who lives here will tell you. So they have a problem with damp, and books are very expensive, so they're always built on the first floor. And that continues, really. One of the exceptions is All Souls College in the 18th century, where they built special vaults underneath to keep the damp at bay, but generally speaking, always on the first floor. Now, how does this college come to get built? Well, it's the Hwadam family that built it, and there's a chap called Nicholas Hwadam. Now you see, there's Nicholas Hwadam on the left. He's got that wonderful suit of armour. He probably never wore one in his life. And in his hand, he's got a little model of the college. It's this college. Now, Nicholas Hwadam is one of these characters that's incredibly wealthy. He lives in Somerset, Devon borders. That's where he's got lots of agricultural land, and he becomes very wealthy. But unlike most wealthy aristocrats of the time, he stays out of government. He doesn't want to get involved. He doesn't even be a justice of the peace. He just stays largely anonymous, but very wealthy. As he gets into his 70s, he decides, because they've got no children, he wants to endow college at Oxford. But he's a bit of a ditherer. Okay? And he never gets round to it before he actually dies. However, his wife is a different kettle of fish altogether. Dorothy Hwadam. She's the person that really founds this college, with his money, if you like. Now, she's a completely different character in that she's much more forceful. She gets things done, okay? And she manages to get this college built in just 4 years.
Wow.
Now that's incredible for the time. And she actually project manages it from Somerset. She never comes here. Never once comes here. But what she does is she makes people do things. She gets people motivated. She has good connections at court and the political circles, and she pays people money. She does whatever she needs to do and pulls off this amazing feat of building this in 4 college. So it's 4 years. So really, she is the star of this college. She also appoints all the fellows. So she's a bit of a control freak, really, if you like. And she also makes certain stipulations. Now, women are not, even though she's a woman herself, the only woman that's allowed in this college is the laundress. Okay? The person that does the laundry. And she's got to be of such looks and age and to be beyond suspicion to be allowed in, basically. So she's going to be a person that's probably quite old and, you know, relatively safe to let round undergraduates. So this is built in the 17th century. There are lots of modern buildings that we can't see, which are just behind there. There's a new modern library. There's lots of new accommodation. As the university expands in the 19th century, lots of accommodation is added. A lot of these colleges get much, much bigger, you know, until we get to and they're still expanding to this day. Colleges are buying up land in Oxford. There's building work going over Keble College over to the north. Lots of things are going on all the time where the college is acquiring land. For us local people here, we just see the place being eaten up by the university. Because if any land becomes available, it buys it up. It's got more money, it can outcompete anybody else in the town, basically. The only exception to that is a new shopping centre that's being built over on the west side of the town. Right, so that's basically Wadham College. Just to let you know some famous people that came here. Christopher Wren, who we've heard about before, he was a student here. Some actresses, you're familiar with Tim McInnery, who was Captain Darling in Blackadder. Anyone see Blackadder? Yes. Right, he came here. Rosamund Pike is an actress. She came here. And Felicity Jones, another actress. One was in Gone Girl and was a Bond girl in Live and Let Die, or Piers Brosnan, whichever one that was. So lots of theatrical people, actors, have been to this particular college. And I just want to tell you about one particular warden as well, and this is linked to Christopher Wren. After the Civil War, all the colleges have their heads of college ousted by Parliament because they're basically on the royalist side. Now normally that works out badly because the person they put in is a figurehead or something, no connection, nobody likes them. In this particular case they appoint a chap called John Wilkins. Now John Wilkins is a bit different than all the others. He's a scientist in the days when there are no scientists. He fills this place with all sorts of contraptions, mechanical contraptions. They're in the garden, they're in here. But importantly, what he does is he starts hosting meetings of scientists up in that room, which is the original Wardens Lodging above the tower there. And the people that come here are Christopher Wren, as he's already at college here originally, Robert Hooke and Robert Boyle. It's handy if your name was Robert if you want to join the club. And they start what's called an invisible university. Because science is not really a thing that the university does. It starts off as what's called natural philosophy and starts to evolve into science in the 19th century. Anyway, they meet up in that room and they discuss all sorts of things. And eventually, when they leave Oxford, they form the Royal Society in London. So the Royal Society for Science is founded from these people and some other people that we won't talk about from the other place. And basically, that's an important development in terms of the development of science. And incidentally, Christopher Wren has a dog. Okay? And the dog's name, I actually guessed it, I couldn't believe I guessed this first time. Anyone know what his dog was called? No? What's a great dog name? Brilliant, that was it. His dog was called Fido. Okay? And this dog, the first ever infusion of inoculation, if you like, for blood from one animal to another takes place by Christopher Wren, and he does it on his own dog called Fido.
Wow.
Okay? And the good news is nobody dies. The dog prospers, does very well, and that's the first transfusion, I believe, in history takes place on his dog Fido. Anyway, any questions on the quad? No? Okay.
Any special rules about the grass?
Yeah, generally speaking, you're not allowed to go on the grass. People do wander onto the grass, but it's best if you don't really, because I can get in trouble if people keep doing it. Originally, there weren't lawns in the colleges. They would tend to be gravel. So these lawns in colleges are a relatively new phenomenon from the 19th century or 18th century. And in some colleges, they play croquet on them. So the students aren't even allowed on them, generally speaking. But in the summer term, so in Hartford College, I know they play croquet. The students are allowed in the summer term to go on the grass. Okay, right. So, we're coming up to the 2 hours. And that empire included obviously lots of countries, but one of the biggest parts of the empire was India. Now, if you just look behind me over there, this building over there, there used to be the Indian Institute. Now, if you were getting a job in the Indian civil service was a great job to have. You become rich basically if you got a job in the English. And 45% of the people that studied for their civil service exams did it in Oxford. And what happens is towards the end of the 19th century, some private individuals get together and what they want to do is build somewhere which tells people about the culture of India. And what they do is they build this building here. And if you look at the top, oh, it's in the right angle for us. Can you see the elephant on the top? You see the elephant? And on top of the elephant is a howdah. That's where you sit, basically. And that dates back to the obviously original building. If you look at the carvings, you can see these Indian or Hindu gods on the corner here. So inside there originally was lecture rooms, a library, there was even a museum of artifacts from India and some basically seminar or rooms where you could teach. And that was to improve British people's knowledge of the Indian culture, but more specifically those students who are going to be civil servants in that country. Now obviously the empire's gone, so there's no need for an Indian Institute anymore, and that is the Oxford Martin School. It was founded by a guy called James Martin. Now, he's not James Martin the chef, okay? James Martin writes lots of computer books in the 1980s, and he becomes really wealthy. And he gives the university £60 million. £60 million. It's the biggest single donation the university's ever had. Okay? And it sets up this place, no longer the institution, but it's a research school. And they're researching into all the problems of the 21st century. So weather change, geoengineering projects, population growth, economics, all sorts of those issues related to government are actually researched there. And a lot of papers that you'll see come out of Oxford University come out from there. They also do lectures from there as well. So people run lectures and they might run them in the Sheldonian Theatre. Okay? So it's another example, though, of how another bit of Oxford has been acquired by the university. Because before that Indian Institute was there used to be a coffee shop, some houses and some shops. Okay? And this is a pattern all around Oxford of shops, houses, places where people lived being acquired by the university. Now if we just come a little bit further forward, here, just quickly gather here. I don't know if any of you had a chance to go in here yet. Okay, well that's great then, because you've still got the opportunity. This is called the Western Library. Now this is part of the Bodleian Library. Yeah. So when I talked about that tunnel that started at Radcliffe Square, it comes all the way through here and into this bit here. Now this is built in the 1930s, but not completed until 1940. It was built to house 5 million books. At the time they thought 5 million, that'll be good, that'll last us a long time, you know. Now when it finished in 1940, it doesn't actually open because what's happening in 1940? The war is on, you know. So that building for the first 6 years is used by the military for analysing intelligence, basically. Anyway, it was well known as the ugliest building in Oxford. Okay? Everybody hates this building, or did hate this building. In 2015, the university spent £80 million on refurbishing it. And when they did that, they gave public access for the first time into the Bodleian Library. And the tour is just about coming to an end. I'm going back to the Tourist Information Office, so anyone who wants to go back there can come back with me. But if not, I'd advise you to go and have a look in here. Because inside you can see the big hall, there's a cafe in there as well, and you can see up onto the first floor some of the library floors at the university. But also at the back, there's two exhibitions on music. There's a treasures museum. You can go inside there, it's a darkened room, and they've got some wonderful publications there going back years, and one of the original Magna Cartas, a copy of the original Magna Carta, goes back to 1217. And lots of wonderfully illustrated books from centuries gone by, so it really is worth going in there and having a look. If you like Jane Austen, there's also a Jane Austen exhibition on at the moment in there as well. So if you go in there and go right, you go into the treasures. If you go left, you go into the Jane Austen exhibition. They're both free of charge, okay? And when you finish, if you want a cup of coffee, there's a nice place to sit and have a cup of coffee, and there are loos in there as well. So that's just about the end of the tour. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Very
And,
much so. Just one question. What's an Oxford Don?
Well, an Oxford Don is like a generic term to use to describe academics or tutors or professors or lecturers. It's a generic term. It's generally used to refer to fellows of colleges as Oxford Don. But it's not got a specific meaning, it's a kind of more general meaning.
What's the connotation then? Positive or negative then? Depends.
I think it's not negative. I wouldn't say it's particularly positive either.
Right.
If you've watched Inspector Morse, you know, then the Dons are always villains
Yeah, that's
in
right.
that. But actually, in real life, in my experience, they tend to be really nice people. In fact, you know, you consider that they allow people to go in the colleges and traipse around. They're actually really quite friendly generally, you know, and they welcome access for people, which is great, obviously people like me.
Right.
Was Oxford Library did join the